Welcome back. I'm Peter St. Onge. This is a weekly roundup of my daily videos on the economy and freedom, where I cut through the BS and lay out what the gaslighting clowns pulled out of their hats this week and what is coming next. Here come the $3 trillion deficits. Last week, stocks fell the most in a month on news the big, beautiful budget passed the House. A bill that will, thanks to rhinos in Congress, add a big, beautiful $5 trillion to the national debt. With Republicans like this, who needs Democrats? The first market to hit was bonds, which always get nervous when governments can't pay their bills. The 20-year bond broke the psychologically important level of 5%, a level last seen in April of 2007, as in right before the financial crisis. Last week I mentioned the collapse in Japanese bonds as their government admits they can never again afford tax cuts. America is now one big beautiful step behind. Spending will never drop again, no matter which party is in charge. So the background here is federal spending jumped during COVID at rates we normally see in world wars, going from $4.9 trillion in 2019 to nearly $7 trillion in 2021. That quadrupled deficits from under $1 trillion in 2019 to almost $4 trillion in 21. The COVID orgy, of course, was bipartisan, but the cage fight was always what happens after the crisis. As in, does the deficit return to Earth, or is that power grab permanent, with a permanent deficit big enough to gobble up the entire republic? Now, with Biden in power, there was still hope. Maybe, just maybe, if we hire Republicans, they'll actually cut the federal government, like they've been promising for like a century. Alas, it was not to be. Even before the big, beautiful budget, we were looking at deficits of $22 trillion over the next 10 years. The House just slapped another $5 trillion on that, probably $6 when the gimmicks come clean, which brings us to nearly $30 trillion of deficit in the next 10 years alone. It's almost $3 trillion per year, and it would nearly double the national debt. Of course, that's if we're lucky. Debt interest alone is on track for $1.8 trillion a year. And of course, if we hit recession, all bets are off. The deficit will be 4 to 5 per year. So this is what knocked bond markets, and it will keep knocking bond markets harder and harder, because just as important as $3 trillion deficits is who did it, the party of fiscal restraint. If Republicans are pushing $3 trillion deficits and Dems are worse, there truly is no hope left. So what's next? We are entering a crisis decades in the making, starting with the FDR deep state and the Federal Reserve that feeds it like a cancer. We're now in a horse race between Fed and Treasury printing money to kick the can at the cost of inflation and a crashing dollar, versus bond markets where the so-called bond vigilantes stand ready to deliver righteous justice and double-digit bond yields on a Congress that cannot control itself. We already saw a warning shot last Wednesday with the ugliest bond auction this year, sparking that stock crash. History tells us paper money always ends the same, with runaway inflation and crushing government. The question is, can prudent leaders delay the inevitable, buying us a couple more decades like the 1950s or the 1990s, or do they push us headlong off the cliff? Trump just closed a massive loophole that Chinese companies were using to flood America with cheap crap. Is this the end of $5 sneakers that fall apart? Hidden in the back and forth of the U.S.-China trade war was a change Trump made to something called de minimis exemption that was allowing over $100 billion of Chinese exports into the U.S. with zero customs scrutiny. In response, the Chinese Amazon Temu.com halted all China shipments. A loophole was created by Barack Obama, and it let anything less than $800 into the U.S. without customs, documentation, or inspection. China, of course, scrutinizes every import from the U.S., intentionally dragging their feet to freeze us out. Chinese e-commerce sites like Temu and Shein use de minimis to flood America with billions of dollars, from toasters to t-shirts, undercutting American-made competitors. One major seller on Temu estimated de minimis gives them a 30% cost advantage, while a 2023 House committee said Temu and Shein account for almost one-third of all customs-free packages shipped to the U.S. The rest are care packages from mom. In total, an estimated 700 million shipments from China were coming in under de minimis. Throw in Chinese transshipments through Vietnam or Mexico, and it could be north of 100 billion. The loophole also made it a lot easier for China to send fentanyl to the U.S., say it's worth less than $800 and customs will not take a peek. And it meant that any tariffs on China could be easily dodged by simply breaking up shipments into 800 or less. So de minimis dates for 1930 originally intended for Americans bringing small souvenirs back from abroad. But President Obama jacked it to $800, leading to a tenfold increase in shipments from China that are most definitely not souvenirs. It was actually a lot worse until 2018 when Trump closed a separate loophole where China got sweetheart postage rates funded by American taxpayers, which made it literally cheaper to ship from China than domestically. So you could make the exact same coffee maker in Ohio, and it literally cost you more to ship it in-state than it would from Shanghai. So Trump closed that by threatening to pull out of the Universal Postal Union, which is the international organization that negotiates postal rates. The move raised China's shipping costs by 164%, ending de minimis evens it up even more. So what's next? One of Trump's priorities is getting rid of hidden subsidies that give Chinese exporters unfair advantages in the U.S. market. Scaling back de minimis is important because it effectively cancels our tariffs, as in they can still tariff us, but ours bounce off. And tariff us they do. China hits U.S. imports and everything from soybeans and corn, automobiles and farm machinery, consumer products across the board. China's non-tariff barriers effectively block all imports of poultry and beef, steel, timber, and American energy. And China forces foreign companies to share their tech with Chinese competitors to literally train those competitors in joint ventures as a condition to sell in China, at which point they then export to the U.S. On trade, China is one of the most predatory countries in the world. A lot of this was China's doing, but a lot was American politicians selling our own manufacturers and farmers down the river. Trump just knocked out a big one. A word from our sponsor. The United States now has a strategic Bitcoin reserve. It's not speculation, it's official policy. Unchained and the Bitcoin Policy Institute are breaking it all down in a new report with a live panel called The Strategic Bitcoin Reserve Era Begins. If you care about the future of Bitcoin, you'll want to be there. Visit unchained.com/PSO to register and read the report. If you own gold or silver, you know they're a great hedge against financial instability and let you grow your wealth outside the banking system and gain greater control over your finances. Monetary Metals offers you the ability to increase your precious metal ounces every single month. Instead of paying to own metal, with Monetary Metals, you get paid 4% on your gold paid in more ounces. Now's the time to secure your wealth and build your legacy in an asset that the government cannot inflate away. Join thousands of investors earning interest in physical gold and silver every month with Monetary Metals. Visit monetarymetals.com/Peter to learn more. Now back to our show. Federal spending fell last quarter for the first time since COVID. Pigs do fly. And take a picture because it ain't gonna last thanks to our Rhino Congress. The miracle comes from the Bureau of Economic Analysis hidden in their most recent GDP report. The drop was big. It was 5.1% on an annualized basis. At that pace, we would cut government in half in just over a decade. So the drop in government spending was part of the reason GDP was negative last quarter, which is something I've been warning about all year since government GDP statistics, bizarrely, count every dollar government spends as if it were creating wealth. Meaning if you cut transgender operas or fraudulent payments to illegals, you get an automatic reduction in GDP even though the American people are now richer. Or as Elon colorfully put it, if you fire all the factory workers or replace them with well-paid bureaucrats at DMV, GDP would go up. So what drove that pigs flying drop in federal spending? The main one was military, since Trump stopped giving hundreds of billions to Ukraine. The other was DOGE cuts, including 90% of U.S. aid funding that was allegedly feeding starving Africans, but was actually paying obese radicals to burn police stations and vote early and often. DOGE cuts included up to $20 billion at EPA, where Biden's special climate advisor admitted they were, quote, throwing gold bars off the Titanic, as in handing billions to climate activists before Trump took office. It also included billions to the Department of Health, including richly deserved cuts at NIH and CDC, who so gallantly defended the deep state during COVID. And it included billions of DEI, from the openly communist National Endowment for the Arts to the Department of Defense, so it stops giving DEI participation trophies to helicopter pilots. So its next, polls say 80% of Americans want lower federal spending. Sadly, this one looks like a fluke. Congress has been chomping at the bit to respend all the DOGE savings with tens of billions more for our bloated military budget, while the Republicans' big beautiful budget adds at least $5 trillion in new spending with no cuts in sight. Now, to be sure, this is a lot better than Biden, who requested a $1.2 trillion raise in his last budget, of which Congress gave him $800 billion. Cackles would probably have been worse considering she is actually lucid. The bigger lesson is apparently it's not impossible to cut federal spending. In fact, I suspect very few Americans even felt that annualized 5.1% drop. Sadly, given rhinos have hijacked Congress, this may be the last quarter of lower government spending for a very long time. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent says we don't need to cut federal spending. We can just grow our way out of our $36 trillion debt, soon to be $66 trillion. I want what he is smoking. In an interview last week, Bessent admitted the big beautiful budget will add trillions in debt, which is, of course, not what Republican voters wanted, and which is not sustainable with interest on the debt already on track for $1.8 trillion per year, over a quarter of the federal budget, every last penny borrowed. But Bessent said, do not worry, we will just grow into it. As in, sure, debt's growing at almost 7% per year, the highest outside war or recession. But if we can just get the economy growing faster than 7%, we are out of the woods. Now, this is true, of course, and it's also not going to happen, meaning, as Will Clemente put it, we are in, quote, full-blown Ponzi mode. To see why, since 2000, our economy has grown by 4.5% per year, half of which was inflation. So the real economy grew just over 2%. That means to get to Bessent's target, we would need to double the real growth rate to nearly 5% per year. Now, that's what rich Asian countries do, who are not run by the clowns in Congress. America has not seen that kind of growth since the early 60s, long before the long march to the corrupt deep state, and before Richard Nixon killed off the dollar, launching the big government bonanza. So what would it take to double real growth? In the near term, Trump could actually hit it, given the trillions of foreign investment pouring under his big beautiful tariff umbrella. But we're not talking a couple of years here. We are talking decades just to stabilize the debt. For that, we would need radical improvements to the business environment, something like 90% reduction in useless regulations, so climate, diversity, union mandates. We'd need a massive retrenchment, getting government out of entire industries from energy to health to farming and manufacturing. We'd need a complete elimination of business taxes, ideally all income taxes. Sadly, none of this is on the menu. In fact, the big beautiful budget spends more while barely holding the line on taxes. So Secretary Bessent is absolutely correct that we could grow our way out of the debt. But here in the real world, where Congress is captured by special interests, filibustered to paralysis, and has a pet fed to morphine the pain with inflation, it ain't gonna happen. Leaving the much easier way to get to 7% nominal growth, inflation. Print enough inflation that even 2% real growth turns into 7 or more with inflation. That would melt away the national debt. Of course, it would also melt away your life savings. So what's next? In the near term, Trump's investment boom could hide that our fiscal roof is collapsing. But if unsustainable deficits are now permanent, inflation is coming, whether Bessent likes it or not. When the music stops, you'll want hard assets, so your house, your company, defensive stocks, and of course, gold or Bitcoin. A word from our sponsor. One of the best ways to secure your Bitcoin is with a hardware wallet, a physical device that lets you keep your coins offline without internet connection. One of the most trusted names in hardware wallets is CoinKite, maker of the famous block clock. CoinKite devices are made in Canada and they're run by passionate Bitcoiners who've been at this since 2012, back when Bitcoiners were trading in person at swap meets. You can pick up hardware wallets and plenty of other goodies at coinkite.com/ProfSaintAnge. That's CoinKite.com/ProfSaintAnge. Okay, back to our show. The robots are coming. The quote, iPhone moment is fast approaching for robots, says Zero Hedge, a new article, how robots are the next quote, deployment vector for artificial intelligence. With hardware advances meaning we could be just 2 to 3 years from mass adoption of robots. Are we about to be replaced by robots who can fold laundry better than we ever dreamed? And maybe do our jobs better than our boss ever dreamed? Elon Musk seems to think so. Last week, he said part of stepping back from politics is to focus on robots as the next big thing for Tesla. Indeed, for the world, a new Morgan Stanley report estimates the market for humanoid robots could hit $1 billion per year by 2050. Elon thinks it's much bigger, ultimately 3 to 5 robots per human, so on the order of 20 billion robots. This implies a market of 5 trillion plus, which would be bigger than the global automobile market. Now, Morgan Stanley thinks we've got a decade before the rise of the robots. Elon thinks it's much faster, with at least 50,000 Optimus robots produced by next year. You can find videos of Optimus, the dramatic improvements by the month. Same for Boston Dynamics' robot dog that looks positively science fiction-y. So what happens when the robots take over? On the home front, it's all good. They'll mow the lawn, walk the dog, fix the leaky faucet, and yes, fold the laundry. They'll be expensive at first, and then like all new inventions, get cheap fast to where we're probably looking at 10 or 20,000 per robot. So that's comparable to a high-end gaming computer, so a lot of people will have them. As for jobs, it's more complicated. So a lot of jobs can be done better by robots, especially when labor regulations and minimum wages price out humans. On the other hand, automation has a 1,000-year track record of making us richer, whether it's horses pulling plows or bulldozers replacing shovels. Because every wave of automation is like stepping down on an escalator. Your old job is replaced, but the automation itself makes the new job pay even more. So high automation Japan, for example, is a lot richer than low automation Congo. Now, there's a great economic satire for this by Frederick Bastiat, where he highlights the job-killing power of the sun, saying if we force people to work at night and close the shutters in the day, think how many jobs we could save. Instead, of course, we just enjoy the free light and find other jobs to do. So what's next? The key for public policy is that it has to be super easy to create new jobs. So get rid of the red tape, the licensing, regulations, heck, get rid of the taxes. After all, both Hong Kong and Detroit lost their entire manufacturing sector. Hong Kong got richer because it was easy to create jobs. Detroit never recovered. The robot revolution, like the AI revolution, will deliver incredible growth, probably surpassing the automobile and internet respectively. And both will deliver hyperventilating predictions of catastrophe. Just last week, the brilliant Mark Andreessen warned robots could, quote, break the economy by making everything too cheap. Of course, that's not how it works. The Industrial Revolution made everything too cheap, which rescued humanity from the long night. Still, smart public policy, as in stay out of the way, is required, or the techno-utopia could turn into a jobless nightmare. Thanks for tuning in. Remember to subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and go to petersanons.com for daily videos and in-depth articles with charts and all the gory details. Okay, we'll be watching. See you next time.